Hello, and welcome to Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and this is the podcast where we talk about leadership, diversity, communication challenges, presentation skills, and particularly one of my passions is international communications. So today, before I get into our wonderful guest, Ms. Yumiko Murakami, I want to invite you to see where your presentation skills are strong and where you might need a little support by taking our free online assessment at speakforresultsquiz.com. That's www.speakforresultsquiz.com. And that's where you can see where your presentation skills are strong and where perhaps a bit of support could get you the results you need and the recognition that you deserve. My guest today is Yumiko Murakami, who is one of the three founders of MPower Partners in Japan. It is the first women-led venture capital firm in Japan that focuses on environment, social, and governance values and admits diverse applications. So they are funded and are supporting several companies, of which 40% are female-led, and that's a higher percentage than anybody here, really. So it's not specifically about supporting women, it's about recognizing the values that women bring. And that is what got me interested in talking with her, besides my own lifelong interest in Japan. Her official bio is Yumiko Murakami is a general partner at MPower Partners. She's the former head of the OECD Tokyo Center, prior to which she worked for 20 years in the global financial industry, mostly as a managing director at Goldman Sachs in New York, London, and Tokyo. She's a leading authority on a wide range of economic policy issues, such as corporate governance, tax guidelines, diversity, education, trade, and innovation. Yumiko sits on several government advisory panels, including Prime Minister Kishida's panel on the new form of capitalism. She has an MBA from Harvard Business School, master's from Stanford University, and a bachelor's from Sophia University. She is the daughter of an entrepreneur, and she had really interesting things to say about adult diapers and the business case for adult diapers. I know you'll enjoy this interview. On to the conversation with Yumiko Murakami. Yumiko Murakami, I'm so glad to have you here as a guest on Speakers Who Get Results. Murakami, I should have said, beg your pardon. Welcome. Glad to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, you are a very internationally renowned person. And as we were just saying earlier, you are my first, though I've had an association with Japan and family members there for many years, you're the first person I've interviewed who's based in Japan. So I'm really excited to get a chance to interview you. Before we get to the many questions I have for you, though, let me ask you, if you could interview someone who is no longer with us, who would it be? What would you ask them? And who should be listening?
Great question. If I could interview my mother, or I should say my late mother, who passed away 11 years ago, she one of a very few female entrepreneurs. At the time, she became a store owner. She started a drugstore at the age of 48 after raising 5 children. The first store led to the second store, led to the third store. Within the first 10 years of her business, she basically owned the largest franchise of drugstores in my hometown. And during this time, I was already in the United States. I did not watch her growing her business. She eventually sold her company to another very large company. So she was very successful in terms of making this business a very successful enterprise. But I really did not have a really good chance to really talk to her about the experience that she had as a female entrepreneur in Japan. And if I could talk to her, now that I'm a venture capitalist, I invest in ventures, I invest in companies, and a lot of the companies that I invest are run by female founders. I would love to ask my mother, what was it like to be literally the only businesswoman or business
Business
female?
owner.
Yeah, and that must have been so crazy. So if I had even 5 minutes with her, I
Uh-huh.
would have some questions.
Oh, you could have more than 5 minutes. This is your dream
Yeah.
interview, right? Yes. How
Yeah,
she was,
like how did you convince male? Everyone else was male. Everyone else was older men, whether, it's the banks that she had to work with or, vendors, investors, everyone was a guy.
yeah.
And how did you manage, if I were talking to
Mhm.
her, how did you manage to convince them that they should be dealing with her?
What
Or
year
with you, I
was
should.
it? What year was
This
it that
was
she began?
literally so she began her business. I believe it was around 1990.
Okay.
So literally, 30 some years
30,
ago.
30 some years ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Good for her. And didn't you say that your grandmother had been something of an entrepreneur as well?
No, she was a teacher. But again, if you think about the Japan context, women did not work at all. So there
Right.
were only very, very few professional occupations, professional jobs
Hmm.
women could take. And a high school teacher that she was, it was one of the very few professional positions that women could attain.
Hmm.
So she became a teacher. And my
Hmm.
mother, who was a housewife for a long time, raising 5 kids, including obviously me, I guess she had in me just watching her own mother being a professional. Again,
Hmm.
that was very unusual. I guess she had in me that she had in her that there was something that really made her want to do something a little bit more than just being a wife and staying at
Hmm.
home mom, which eventually led to this business, which, by the way, at the time I was already in the United States, I did not like the idea. I really felt
Ah.
as if my mother, with no business experience, I thought she could fail.
Hmm.
And it was too, in my mind, too risky being a woman, being, a housewife, very male dominant
Hmm.
society of Japan. How could she do business? How could she run a successful business? And eventually I attended school in the United States. I got a job as an investment banker with Goldman Sachs. So as a banker, I
An
knew.
investment banker at Goldman Sachs. Okay,
Yeah, so
that makes sense.
I knew how hard it was for anybody, entrepreneur to make a business out of, nothing, right? She
Hmm.
literally started from nothing. So I was really worried about her.
I'm curious. When I was first learning about Japanese society, one of my sisters was a journalist and was a journalist for many years and lived in Tokyo writing for a Japanese newspaper for 3 years. So I heard lots of stories, and I was involved in some artistic projects that had to do with Japan in the 1980s. So basically over the 1980s decade. And I'm curious, what I learned or what I was told was that if you were allied with a company, it was more important to be an employee as part of a unit, a recognizable brand, so that any entrepreneur, male, female, or whatever they are, was already at a social disadvantage, if you will.
Yeah,
Is
no,
that
I think
true?
that is very true. I mean, I must say it's definitely changing.
Hmm.
The culture is changing, and it has become a lot more open to entrepreneurship, and there are many more startups compared to the time that your sister was in Japan. But there's a still very strong culture in Japan which values lifetime employment.
Hmm.
So you go to school, you graduate at the age of 22, you join a company, established company, you stay with the same company for the next 40 years. And that's expected.
Does
There's so
anybody
much.
still use the term salary man? Can't remember what the
Oh my God,
Japanese. Yes.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Salaryman is still alive. And salaryman is still it's a mainstream way of living. Like I said, it is changing. The society is changing, but the salaryman terminology that you mentioned is still very much the mainstream. So what you said earlier in terms of how Japanese tend to have this very controlled and almost, it's very risk-free life, right? Because you
Mm-hmm.
join a company, you stay with the company.
Yeah.
You know that you're going to get paid every month for the next 40 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is a seniority-based compensation. There's a seniority-based promotion system. So the longer you are with a company, the more senior you become and the higher your salary becomes. And the unemployment rate in Japan has been extremely low, right? No one gets, I don't want to say no one, but very few people, get fired.
Mm-hmm.
The labor law is extremely, strict. So in that environment, people tend to become very, very risk averse.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, your sister pointed out, risk taking appetite among Japanese people, I must say, is very low. It's almost non-existent. As I said earlier, it's now finally changing. And that's partially the function of the labor market becoming more fluid, that there's more mobility, companies are becoming more open to more flexible employment, I guess, systems versus lifetime employment system. So that is changing. But finally, that word salaryman, the notion of salaryman is still very much here. So it's interesting to see how things are changing, but it's kind of slow.
Going back to your mother, I would think that people who run corner stores, though, that then you're not part of a corporation. You are an entrepreneur. Say you run the corner grocery store or the corner drugstore. Is there maybe a family tradition that keeps you within the pattern, if you will?
Well, so just to give you a little bit more background of my mother's business, she did start with one little store, one little corner drugstore, right? Which did well. And, she ended up expanding her franchise. Her company became one of the largest company in the western part of Japan. She was selling $200 million a year. At that point, she sold her stake to one of the largest companies in Japan. What was really interesting, again, I wasn't with her when she was doing this. I was already in the United States. But afterwards, I learned that one of the interesting things that she did when she was starting with this drugstore business was to really understand unmet need of aging society. And that was so interesting. In my hometown, which is in the western part of Japan, it's called Shimane-ken, which is, very countryside, very middle of nowhere. You probably know that today, 2023, Japan is one of the fastest aging societies in the world.
Yes.
We're shrinking very fast. Demographic challenge is extremely severe. 126 million people today. That would drop below 100 mil by 2050. So that fast. We're just going very, very quickly in terms of how quickly our population is shrinking. So this is 2023. Back in 1985, 1990, when my mother was starting her business, it was not very obvious this was happening. In terms of the Tokyo population or larger cities, they were not seeing this demographic challenge as yet, except my mother, who was already starting to see signs of demographic change in her hometown, because my prefecture was already starting to see signs of declining population. She realized that there was going to be new needs, new demand from this market, which was going to potentially create interesting business opportunities. So today, maybe, I'm not sure in the United States, but at least for Japan, it's true that there are more adult diapers selling than baby diapers. Who would have thought 30 years ago that was going to be the case? My mother knew adult diapers were really, really handy. You know why? Because she was taking care of my father's aging parents. So in Japan, even today, it's the woman's responsibility to take care of not only her own parents, but also her husband's parents.
I think
And
that's
that's what,
around the world.
yeah,
That's
but
happening
if
all
you,
over the world. It's usually the
right,
women who are taking
but
care.
if you're not taking care of older parents, you don't know that you need adult diapers.
Yeah.
Because you don't do it. You don't do anything. So my mother was able to see how important it was for her company to provide that kind of product lineups. So she started to sell all these nursing care products, diapers and other things that are important for taking, when you take care of, older parents. And that really differentiated her business versus everyone else. And by the way, all the other larger companies in the drugstore industry, they're all run by men. So they have no clue.
Right.
They didn't know.
They're not the ones
Oh,
who are
diapers, what?
changing
You sell diapers
grandpa's
for
diapers.
babies.
Yes.
So she started to do really well because she was able to identify this unmet needs because she was the only one who was able to see why this was important for customers, right?
She was a
And
visionary then.
but then again, she was the one who actually doing it.
Yeah.
So it just goes to show you how advantageous it could be if you are different from everyone else. If you are the only female entrepreneur who thinks about these things, because no one else thinks about it. The
Mm-hmm.
market is huge for nursing care products. But
Mm-hmm.
unless you actually have done it or your friends, your female friends talk about it, oh, it's great to use adult diapers. Guys never talk about it.
That's a wonderful story. That's a wonderful story. So, what brought you to creating MPower Partners with your friends, which is a venture capital firm? It's focused on ESG, and I wrote down, you had a great phrase, tech enabled solutions, but also to support female founders. Is it more about sustainable ESG, or is it more about female founders, or is it just that the female founders are the ones who think about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we don't have gender lens investment approach, meaning
Mhm.
we don't have a target for, say, female founders in terms of investments. But if you look at the investments that we have made so far, we have 10 companies in our portfolio. We continue to make investments, but right now we have 10 companies. 40% or 4 out of the 10 companies, they are run by female founders. And that's much, much higher than, let's say, if you look at the entire venture landscape.
Mhm.
Female founders are, less than 5% or so, right?
Yeah,
So
and it's
it's much
usually 2% of the
yeah,
money
that's
goes to the
yeah,
women. Yeah.
2% of the capital that supposedly goes to female founders, which is, just terrible. So we allocate 40% of capital right now. And that's not because we have this target of, say, 40%. Let's just make sure we put 40% of money into female founders. It's because we happen to have a very fortunate deal flows where quite a few minority founders would come to us. And also we, because of the fact that we are probably women, because we don't have any biases against either men or women, we tend to actually look at all business opportunities, whether they are run by men or women. So we tend to have a much wider range of investment opportunities. And we just pick the best ones that we think would make most sense. And they happen to be 40% women. So it goes to show you how biased a lot of times the selection process is, because if you are not exposed to these great female founders, you're not going to have 40% investment into, this particular segments of the population, right? So I think it's really important for people to realize that there is unconscious bias in selecting what kind of companies you want to meet, what kind of companies you want to do diligence on. If you actually make sure that you remove that unconscious bias from that selection process, chances are you're going to be able to find great companies, and chances are many of them are probably run by female founders. And by the way, just to go back to your question, we did not set up saying, okay, let's set up a first female-led VC, and let's invest in women. It did not start like this. We started our fund thinking, okay, let's do the most economically sensible thing when it comes to selecting companies. And we realized that, for example, having a very open policy in terms of selecting companies, whether gender or racial, any other association, that makes most sense. So in the end, we may have more exposure to female or minority founders than, say, compared to our peer VCs, but that's because we're doing something that makes most economic sense. So at the end of the day, we thought ESG makes most business and economic sense. We did not start thinking, oh, let's do something that's good for the society. We did not start our VC that we're going to be social impact fund. We said, let's make money. Let's make sure we are going to achieve commercially competitive financial returns. How do we do that? We do things that will make most business sense. Oh, by the way, if you're looking at only 10 companies that are run by men, and if you're looking at 100 companies that are run by both men and women, chances are you're going to make better choices in terms of finding better companies in that 100 company pool versus 10.
Before we go on, for our listeners who aren't conversant with the jargon, what does ESG mean? And what does it mean to you specifically?
So, as I said earlier, ESG is a very sort of commonly used word, and environment, E, society, and S and G for governance. These ESG
So
terminology
environment,
and
society, and governance.
Yeah.
Yes.
So these ESG, you hear in many situations, especially in the investment world. And what this means is that these elements, environmental elements, society elements, and governance elements, these are the elements that are good for business. And therefore, we as an investor, we look for companies that are strong, that are likely to grow, that are likely to give us investor good financial returns, because these ESG, environment, society, and governance, these are so-called non-financial elements or non-financial information. They're not about profits, they're not about margins, they're not about sales, right? When you say environment, we're talking about air quality. We're not talking about profit margin, right? We're talking about gender that falls into the society, bucket. Again, we're not talking about, ROE, return on equity, or, none of these things are considered financial information. But these ESG elements are, in fact, as important as financial elements. So when we talk about gender, some people may say, oh, just because you have diversity, it doesn't give the company better margins, or it doesn't give the company better sales projection, right? So that's what you might think. In our mind, yes, gender diversity may not directly mean that you are going to expand your margins from 10% to 20% tomorrow, but because diversity can give the company much more flexibility in terms of identifying different business opportunities. My mother did. My mother was able to say, hey, adult diaper, that's going to grow. That's going to sell really well. That's because she had a very different perspective on the business that she was running. Other guys were not, they couldn't really see. So this is something that can make the company stronger. Again, we take these ESG elements as very strong elements to make the company stronger, even though they're not financial information, they're not financial terms. It's important to realize that these are the things that make economic sense, that make business sense, and therefore you can make more money in long run. So it's very difficult to really say, oh, just because you have more women on the board, you're going to make more money tomorrow. It's not going to be tomorrow. But if you're thinking about company that can thrive on a long-term, basis, say could be 10 years, then chances are companies with diversity on the board, they're going to do better than the ones without diversity.
So it's the long game, really, to allow the company
it's a
to
long game, yeah.
survive. Yes, as opposed to make a lot of money fast and then cash out, which is actually what a lot of venture capitalists do. I worked in Silicon Valley for many years. So a lot of venture capitalists in Silicon Valley are all about making money as fast as they can and then getting out. So Yumiko, let me ask you a couple of the things about what it was like. One of the things that I work with a lot, mostly with American-based or European-based women, is the challenge of getting men to listen and to appreciate what the women are good at. And I'm curious, when you and your two partners were starting MPower Partners, how did you get the men in sort of the financial society to listen to you? You must have investors, you must have male. How did you get the men to listen to, oh, those girls over there?
Good question. We were extremely lucky. We were able to raise money very quickly. We were very, very lucky in terms of, I guess, having men listen to us. And I think one of the things that you have to remember is you always have to know what your strength is. You have to know what your competitive advantage is. And you have to know how to play your competitive advantage or your special experience or knowledge to your strength. And three of us, so myself and the other two female partners, we had a very long experience, number of almost 25 years of experience in the investment banking industry, mostly Goldman Sachs. And we also had a very global, very international experience as bankers. And we actually went to our investors. They're all men, by the way. Every single one of our investors are all men. We went to them and then said, this is what we have done. And based on what we have done in terms of track record, this is what we want to do. And by the way, what we want to do is this venture capital fund, ESG focused ESG fund. Would you invest in us? And I guess we were very lucky that we were able to convince them based on our experience that we would be able to do well with this new fund. And they listened. Like I said, we're extremely lucky we were able to raise money. So again, maybe it was a good timing. Maybe there are other things that, just really helped our situation. But we were very clear. We knew what we were able to offer to them. We knew exactly how we could differentiate ourselves versus everyone else. So I think one thing that I would say to my female friends is that do not underestimate your merits. It's very important to, first of all, objectively analyze what your competitive advantage is and
Don't
really
underestimate
understand.
your competitive advantage. Yes.
But you need to understand what it is first. You need to really know exactly how your experience or your knowledge base expertise is different. If you are like any other 99 men, then I'm not sure you can play that game. But you need to really understand that people who can make other people listen to you know what they can offer. So I think the first thing you need to really do is to really reflect really within yourself. What is it that is different about you versus everyone else, and really project a lot of confidence when you talk about your strength. And you know what? I would say chances are, if you are in the business world, and I'm sure in your case, Elizabeth, as well, when you were working as an opera director, I'm sure you're one of a very few female.
I was one of the early women. Yes.
Right. So chances are, when you start thinking about what is it that I'm different, and what is it that I have done, things that are different from others, chances are you are going to be able to come up with a few things that are very unique just by the virtue of, being the only woman in the industry, being the first woman in whatever you're doing. In our case, I was one of a very few female managing directors at Goldman Sachs at the time, things like that. So if you think about those things that are different about you, and you really need to understand that you are unique, if you can present these differentiation points, chances are you can probably, again, you have to really know what they are. But if you know what they are, and if you can project confidence, you can make them listen to you. But I think sometimes what I see sometimes in women is they might underestimate their own differentiating
strengths. Yeah.
Their strength, just because maybe they don't think it's a big deal that they have done XYZ. And the other thing I would say is, so number one, they might underestimate their own merits. Number two, they may not project the confidence that would make men listen to you.
Yes.
So understanding your own strengths and understanding your merits, and really understand how being different gives you a huge advantage. Like my mother, the only woman in the business, adult diaper, right? And then really understand how powerful that differentiation point is. And therefore, you should feel confident. You should project that confidence when you're speaking to whoever. In our case, it was our investors. We had to tell them, we're going to make money for you because we have done XYZ over the last 25 years. We have worked in Europe and US and Japan, Goldman Sachs, other companies. And therefore, we are very confident that we can actually be successful running money with this fund. So I think these two things.
Thank you. Yumiko Murakami, it's been such an honor to have you on this podcast. I'm very excited to have you, and I'm delighted. And I just wish you the best. I hope we want to say that MPower Partners becomes one of the major venture capital funds, if you're not already, and really just watch you take your place in the changing of the way companies are funded. I think that would be a wonderful thing. Thank you so much. I will put all sorts of information in the show notes about what it is that you're doing. And I usually ask for, if someone was listening to you, and say it's a woman who has an idea for a company, or a woman who wants to ask for a loan or investment, shall we say, what would be the first thing you recommend? What's one thing, a place to start, basically?
First of all, you need to talk to people, as many people as possible who are in the same market, whether they are, your potential competitors or your clients, people who might buy your business. And I think what's really important is to do as much homework as possible before you start asking for investments. Because as an investor, I'd like to see whoever comes to me, I like to see that person, having done as much research as possible and have really thought about the business plan. So you don't want to go to somebody with a half-baked idea and, hey,
Right.
can you invest in me? So it's really important that you do your homework, talk to a lot of people, and then with the confidence, you go to an investor or investors.
And know what makes you different.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yumiko Murakami, arigato gozaimasu. Thank you very much for being a guest on Speakers Who Get Results. This has been Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, and I will see you on the next one.
We have just concluded another great episode of Speakers Who Get Results with your host, Elizabeth Bachman. If you got value from today's episode, please feel free to share us with your friends and colleagues. You may also visit elizabethbachman.com for additional resources. Be sure to tune in every week for new episodes, and thanks for tuning in.